Hey guys, it's Olga. Today I wanted to share with you 10 simple tips and hacks to reduce food waste. Food waste is a huge problem nowadays, and we as consumers are actually responsible for most of it, more than grocery stores and restaurants combined. Each year in the United States, for example, up to 40% of food across the entire production and consumption chain never gets eaten. This has a huge impact on the environment, and of course it also has economic consequences. Just think about time, labor, and resources that are being wasted, and our money. A 4-person family can lose at least $1,500 a year on wasted food. So what can be done about it? There are actually small changes that each of us can implement in our daily lives that can make a big difference, and that's exactly what I wanted to share with you today. I was inspired to do this video by Save the Food. They're launching a national campaign in the US to raise awareness about impacts created by wasted food, and also to provide people with practical tools to better plan, store, and cook their food. I'm really excited to be working with them. I think it's such an important topic, so let's get into the video. Tip number 1 is to use it all whenever possible. A lot of people are so used to peeling their fruits and vegetables and cutting off the ends. We peel carrots, potatoes, cucumbers, apples, beets, parsnips. In reality, that's just extra work, and a good scrub with a brush is usually enough to clean your produce. By peeling, you're actually losing a lot of fiber and nutritional value. Some people choose to remove the skin to eliminate pesticides. However, peeling doesn't always guarantee that. Some pesticides can pass through the skin quite easily and penetrate deep into fruits and vegetables. So if you are concerned about pesticides, it's best to consider buying organic produce. I personally think that I peel my produce way too much, so I'm trying to make it a habit to leave the skin on whenever possible. So when I'm cooking potatoes, for example, especially red skin potatoes and sweet potatoes, I just leave the skin on, give them a good scrub, and just cook them as is. Same with carrots and beets. I also use a lot of ginger when I'm cooking and to make ginger tea, so I try to buy fresh young ginger which doesn't need to be peeled. A good hack to keep in mind is that if you do need to peel your ginger, the best way to do it is with a spoon and not with a knife. This way you remove much less. We often throw out stems and ends because, let's face it, they're not very appetizing in their whole form, but they can be incorporated into recipes such as smoothies, sauces, and pesto. I now started to add kale stems and use whole strawberries with their tops in my smoothies. Not only does it reduce my food waste, but I'm also getting all of the fiber and nutrients from those parts. Another hack that I wanted to share with you is to use blended whole lemons and limes instead of their juices. You might know that I'm a huge fan of drinking lemon water in the morning, and in general I love cooking with lemons and limes. So I've been squeezing their juices for a very long time. But when I learned about this hack, it just made so much more sense to me. So what you do is peel and blend a whole lemon and then freeze it in 1 tablespoon portions. I usually use an ice cube tray for this. So now when I'm making my lemon water, I just grab one of those cubes and add warm water to it. You can also add these cubes to your smoothies, soups, or stews. So basically whenever a recipe calls for lemon or lime juice. You might be wondering, well, what do I do with the lemon peel? Instead of peeling the lemon, you can actually zest it and then freeze the zest and use it in recipes that call for it. Lemon zest works wonderfully in pasta sauces, bacon recipes, soups, and stews. Another food that is not being used in the most optimal way is broccoli. A lot of people throw out the stems and just use the crown. But broccoli stems are actually great. Again, they're full of fiber and nutrients, and you can definitely incorporate them into cooking. You can just cut them into pieces and cook them the same way you would with broccoli florets. You can also grate the stems to create a coleslaw or add them to stir fries or salads. But if any of these options do not sound too appealing to you, there is one last thing you can do with broccoli stems. You can repurpose them before you throw them out. Which brings me to my tip number 2, repurpose leftover scraps. If you want to extract the maximum benefit from your produce scraps and get the best bang for your buck, there are actually a few things you can do with them before you finally throw them in the garbage. Vegetable scraps, for example, can be used to make homemade stock. At first, I was a bit intimidated by the idea, but once I tried it once, it was actually very easy. All you do is collect your vegetable scraps, so the peeled skin, the ends, stems, wilting veggies, or any parts of the vegetable that you didn't didn't want to use because they don't look so appetizing. Put them in a bag or a container and store in the freezer until you have enough to make a batch of homemade broth. I usually wait until I accumulate about 4 cups of scraps. There are no specific rules for what vegetable scraps you should use for this. Pretty much anything will work. What I usually collect is scraps from carrots and potatoes if I do decide to peel them, celery, broccoli, mushroom, onion, asparagus, herbs, so pretty much anything. What you do really want to make sure is that you clean your scraps really well before you freeze them. So once you have enough veggie scraps, place them in a large pot. At this point, I also add an extra carrot, celery rib, a couple cloves of garlic, and some onion. For extra flavor, you can also use bay leaf, herbs, some salt and pepper. I will put the rough recipe for you on my website at fablunch.com. The link for it will be in the description. Finally, add about 12 cups of water and bring everything to a boil. Reduce the heat to medium-low. Cover the pot and simmer for 1 hour. Remove the solids from the pot, then strain the broth using a sieve and divide between the jars. It's best to store your homemade broth in glass containers with an airtight lid. I usually use mason jars. You can keep it in the fridge for up to 1 week or freeze it for up to 4 to 6 months. So this is a great way to repurpose your vegetable scraps and save some money on buying vegetable broth from a grocery store. Your citrus peels and fruit skins can be repurposed to infuse water. We can all agree that flavored water is more fun to drink than plain water. So orange peels, skin from lemons, limes, apples, cucumbers, any berries that might be looking a little sad, they will all work great to infuse your water. Lemon peels actually have tons of uses. I found this great article with 31 ways to use lemon peels. If you guys want to check it out, I'll put the link for you in the description. Apparently they can be used to freshen up your fridge, create a DIY cleaning spray. It's actually pretty cool. I personally eat a lot of bananas, so I throw out a lot of banana peels, and I was happy to find out that there is something you can do with them. Apparently, banana peels can be used to clean your houseplants, specifically the leaves. All you do is wipe each leaf on both sides with the inner side of the peel. So this helps to remove dust and dirt from the leaves. It also gives them a pleasant shine and odor. And you can do it as often as you like. Some people do it once a week, or if there is a lot of dust in your home, you can decide to do it more often. So these are some easy ways to repurpose your scraps once you're finally done with them. If you have a chance, please consider composting them. Tip number 3 is to use ice bath to revive any produce that might be looking limp or wilted. This works great with celery, carrot, potatoes, broccoli, lettuce, any other leafy greens. I personally like doing this with kale when I want to use it in a salad, but it's looking a little sad. All you do is submerge the food in a bowl of ice water, then put it in the fridge for 20 to 30 minutes to keep the water cool. Then simply wash the produce and use as intended. If the ice bath didn't work for you for some reason, or if you don't feel like doing it, do not throw out wilting produce. Just use it in recipes where appearance doesn't matter. So think smoothies, stews, soups, and pesto. Pesto is my go-to recipe to use up any wilting greens. Kale, spinach, chard can all be used for pesto. You can even include celery, the stems from kale, and broccoli. Just add a little bit of basil for that traditional pesto flavor, some garlic, nuts, some olive oil, and lemon juice, and you get this beautiful green sauce that tastes amazing. Tip number 4 is to plan your meals and shop smart. Meal planning is a great way to make sure that you don't buy things that you don't need, and it doesn't need to take a lot of your time. I personally don't meal plan every week, but when I do, I spend about 15 to 20 minutes writing down what I want to make for our lunches and dinners. When choosing what recipes to make for the week, I like to plan around a few key ingredients, so I'm using the same ingredients to create different meals. That helps to keep my shopping list short, make sure that I don't overstock my fridge, which can actually lead to your produce going bad, and make sure that I use up everything. After I have the list of the recipes that I want to make, I write down the ingredients that I need and their quantity. Next, I check my fridge and my pantry to see what I already have to make sure I don't buy any excess food. At that point, I can finally come up with my shopping list, and I usually use an app on my phone for that. Save the Food has a handy meal prepping tool called Meal Prep Mate on their website, and it lets you create personalized personalized meal plans and make sure that your food doesn't go to waste. It gives you portion size suggestions, meal inspiration ideas, and waste less guide for all of the ingredients that you choose. If you want to give their meal prep mate a try, the link for it will be in the description. When I'm at the grocery store, I make sure that I stick to my shopping list and avoid any impulse buys. I think that rule number one when grocery shopping should be that you should not be doing it when you're hungry. For me personally, if I'm hungry, I end up buying so many things that are not on the list, so it's never a good idea. Another thing to keep in mind when grocery shopping is that buying in bulk may not always be the way to go. For example, right now, my husband and I are not really eating a lot of apples each week. I usually use maybe 2 or 3 apples in my smoothies or have them as a snack. So it makes no sense to buy a big bag of apples even though the cost per apple might be lower, because I know we're not going to use up all of them and potentially some of them will go bad. And that applies to pretty much anything: produce, grains, nuts, and spices. Buying in bulk might seem more convenient and cost-effective, but it only works if you actually consume large quantities of that food. Research shows that buying in bulk leads to more food waste, so it might make sense for you to look at your bulk food purchases and compare it to what you're actually consuming. Finally, consider buying funny-looking or ugly produce. We as society have this idea of what a perfect apple, tomato, or cucumber should look like. As a result, many fruits and vegetables are thrown away because their shape, size, or color don't quite match this idea. In most cases, these imperfect items are perfectly good to eat, so buying them from grocery stores helps to use up food that might otherwise be tossed. Now let's talk about storing your food. When I get back from grocery shopping, I like to practice FIFO. That actually brings me back to my business school days. FIFO basically stands for first in, first out. So when you're unpacking your groceries, you should move the older products to the front of the fridge, freezer, or your pantry, and put the new products in the back. This way you are more likely to use the older items before they go bad. By the way, do you guys know what produce should be stored in the fridge and what should be stored at room temperature? Turns out a lot of people, myself included, are storing their fruits and vegetables incorrectly. Improper storage leads to premature ripening and eventually rotten produce that just gets thrown away. Save the Food has this great resource on their website dedicated to proper storage of your food. You choose your category and then your ingredient, let's say broccoli, and it tells you whether it should be refrigerated, how long it stays fresh, what are the best ways to store it, if you can freeze it or not, and how to use it up or revive it if necessary. I went through their storage tips and I realized that I'm not storing everything correctly. For example, brown rice should be refrigerated to prevent it from going rancid. Apples are best stored in the fridge, while eggplant should be stored at room temperature. Most herbs should be wrapped in a cloth and stored in a breathable bag in the fridge, while basil should be treated like a flower. You should trim its ends and place it in a glass of water on your counter and put a plastic bag on top. I've always been refrigerating my tomatoes, but it turns out that storing them in the fridge causes the tomatoes to lose their sweetness and texture. So it's best to keep them on the counter away from direct sunlight. Another one of my storage mistakes is keeping onions and potatoes together. Onions cause the potatoes to sprout, and I definitely noticed that, so they should be stored separately. I encourage you to check out the storage tips on Save the Food website. I personally found them really useful. I will put the link to their website down below so you can easily find it. Meal prep is another great way to reduce your food waste. I find that a lot of people are intimidated by meal prepping, but it doesn't have to be complicated or take a lot of your time. You don't need to make every single meal for the week. You can, of course, if you want to, but if you're new to meal prepping, you can start by making just a couple of meals or cooking a few staples that can be thrown into quick meals during the week. I like meal prepping sweet potatoes, grains such as brown rice or quinoa, some steamed or roasted vegetables. By meal prepping, you are more likely to use up what you have in the fridge, and it's a total lifesaver on busy days. The next tip is to learn to preserve your food, aka become best friends with your freezer. Freezing food is one of the easiest ways to preserve it. Let's first look at herbs. I pretty much always end up with leftover herbs and they go bad so quickly. The best way to preserve them is to freeze them in oil or water. So chop whatever extra herbs you have and place them in an ice cube tray. Fill each ice cube with oil or water and freeze to be later used in cooking. You can then use the cubes for stews, soups, potato dishes, and roasts. This preserving method works best with hard herbs, so rosemary, sage, thyme, and oregano. I also like freezing extra fruits and berries and using them in smoothies or to make sorbet. You can check Save the Food website for exact directions for how to freeze each specific fruit properly. Frozen grapes is one of my favorite snacks, and again, a great way to preserve any extra grapes you might have. A cool hack I recently learned is to use frozen grapes instead of ice cubes in your drink if you don't want to dilute it. I also started freezing leftover coconut milk and tomato paste. They never seem to last long in the fridge, and I usually ended up throwing them away. I find that freezing them in an ice cube tray works best because I usually use small amounts of each in my recipes. So it's good to divide them into about 1 tablespoon portions. And of course, you can freeze leftover meals and bulk meals. I'm actually planning on meal prepping a bunch of dishes and freezing them in my last few weeks of pregnancy, so that when the baby comes, my husband and I have something to eat. I don't know how much time I'll have to do the cooking, so I think that's a good idea. Tip number 8 is to use your leftovers and get creative in the kitchen. I try to use all the leftovers and perishable foods that we have before going grocery shopping. I call it my use it all up meals. So I check the fridge, I check the pantry for what you have, and then put everything together to create a new meal. Here is an example of a vegetable soup that I made using leftovers a couple of days ago. I started by sauteing onion and garlic and a little bit of oil, then added diced carrot and cooked everything for 5 minutes. Next, I added 4 cups of my homemade vegetable broth and 1 cup of water. I had some broccoli and shiitake mushrooms left, so I added them as well and continued cooking everything for about 10 minutes. Finally, I added my leftover spinach, bok choy, and brown rice and seasoned the soup with paprika, salt, and pepper. This is a really yummy vegetable soup and a great way to use up leftover veggies and grains. Another way to reduce food waste is to monitor what you throw out on a regular basis, and it can be as simple as making a note on your phone. For us, I know that we used to throw out bread often, so now if we buy any bread, I immediately freeze at least half of it. Once you know what you throw out on a regular basis, you can decide how you can reduce that waste. You can choose to buy less of something, or you can incorporate those preserving techniques I talked about earlier. And the final tip to reduce food waste is consider donating non-perishable items that you most likely won't be using to a food bank before they expire. So the same way you clean out your closet, go through your pantry and see if there are any unopened items that you realistically won't be using. By donating this food, you avoid throwing it away and it can be consumed by someone who really needs it. So these are all of the tips and hacks that I wanted to share with you today. I really hope that you found this video useful. If you did, please don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel by clicking the button down below. If you have any tips or hacks for how to reduce food waste of your own, please share with me in the comments. I would absolutely love to know, and I'm sure other people would appreciate that as well. I hope you guys are having a beautiful day. I will see you in my next video. Bye.